This is session 4 of the series Ministering Out of Overflow, and we're looking at strategies for health. In the previous session, we looked at different parts of the scaffolding that we're building to keep ourselves strong and healthy. And another part of that scaffolding of living free is to form a secure, authentic identity. In a previous session, we looked at the false identity that's built in protection or in our childhood as a result of abuse or trauma. A defensive facade that's put up to protect ourselves. A kind of mask that complies with external expectations and uncertainties. And a lot of the time, that is built through lies, which we've just looked at in the previous session. If my inauthentic self, my false self, portrays a person who is always achieving, always on top, it's because the lie is I won't be accepted if I'm weak. So we've got to look at the journey into an authentic, real, secure identity. And that's a journey into sonship. That's the journey we're all on. The orphan spirit, or the desperate need to be accepted, loved and affirmed, drives behaviour that isn't authentic to ourselves and isn't godly. And that's very dangerous if you are in a position of power or authority or looked up to. So we need to recognise that, repent of the lies believed, and allow the power of the gospel, because that is the gospel. The gospel brings us into sonship. And we walk through the door of salvation, but we walk along the corridor of transformation. And that's our journey into sonship. And it allows us to come into freedom and truth. So we come in with cracks in our inner self. And if we look at this circle of grace, this is the way Jesus lived. And this is the way he wants us to live when we're secure in him. We start with acceptance. This is my son, whom I love, in whom I'm very well pleased. Full confidence in who we are. We're adopted. We are people have the right to that first inheritance, that first son's inheritance. The verse I often use when I'm talking with people, and for myself, is Isaiah 61 verse 7. I don't have it up on a screen, but what it says is, he takes our shame and gives us a double portion of inheritance. He takes our shame, he takes off that filthy, raggedy cloak that the prodigal son came back wearing. He runs down the road and he puts on the cloak of authority, the first son. The double portion was the first son's inheritance. And that's our journey. The shame of the inner self of who we are, the brokenness, we exchange and allow God to put that cloak on. Actually, sometimes with people, I ask them to visualize it. And a girl recently said, I said, what can you see? I see the coat of many colours. It was amazing because for her, that was very key. She's quite beige. And now God is saying, here you are. This is freedom. This is freedom. So often, one of my friends said she had a dream and God was sitting on the edge of his chair saying, did you enjoy it? She said, what? The life I gave you. Did you enjoy it? And that's the son, isn't it? That's the father to the son. Despite sacrifice, are we living to our full potential and capacity? My sister, I've got a sister in America years ago, she said, I want you to write on a piece of paper, why not me? People are going to ask you to do things and you're going to say, why not me? Rather than, no, I'm sorry, I couldn't do that. Or, why not? Why not? That's the acceptance that we live in. And we sustain that with an intimate relationship with Jesus. Time spent with him. Jesus took time out in the quiet Also the time all through the day, living in the presence of God, practicing the presence of God. That's sustaining our sense of acceptance. Somebody once said, I've asked God to show me an aspect of his character every day. I've asked him to show me, actually this aspect I've asked particularly, his kindness. He said, every day for 16 years, God has shown me an aspect of his kindness. That's his nature and character being shown. We can do that too, which will sustain our sense of acceptance. And then it moves around to significance. Jesus said, I am the bread of life. He was significant. He knew he was significant. He knew he was, and who he was and whom he was. It's the same with us. That quiet confidence to live as a child, learning to receive as well as give. Check that in yourself. If you have trouble receiving, that's an orphan. The son says, it's mine. Remember the older son, moaning, I'd been working so hard. And his father said, but my stuff was always yours. Why didn't you accept it? Having nothing to prove, being happy in our own skin with our weaknesses and our strengths. It doesn't mean we let our weaknesses go. It means we're okay with that because God is working on them. And then we achieve. Obviously, Jesus achieved. But God's got good works for us too, for us to achieve. He went round doing good, healing the sick, casting out demons, and loved. So this circle is the circle of grace. It brings life, it brings fruitfulness, and the river flows. We live fully. That prophetic word for me, the river flows in, the river flows out. But often we go the other way around. We achieve to get some significance. That's lie-based. It becomes harder and harder to sustain the incongruency of what we know we are inside and what we're trying to be on the outside, because all we want is to be accepted. So when I start comparing myself, or feeling a bit anxious, I realise I'm trying to achieve. I'm going the wrong way round. Because the cycle of grace brings life and peace and joy and fruit. The cycle of law, which brings death and exhaustion, and may I say burnout, because we're actually trying to do it on our own, and it's lie-based. So we all know abiding rather than striving brings fruitfulness and peace. So find out who you are and what God has called you to. What do you want? What are you passionate about? What do you like? What do you dislike, and why? I'm passionate about what I do. I feel so blessed to be in my sweet spot. I love what I do. What are your strengths and your weaknesses? How would you describe yourself? How do others perceive you? What do you like doing? We've talked about that. What fills our soul? Ask 3 friends. Speak into my life. Tell me 5 strengths, 2 growth areas, 1 thing you think I should change, and 1 thing you see that I don't see. It's very, very interesting. 3 friends. Although I did have a lady recently who asked 15. There's a lot of complicated information there. She did bar charts. It was very good in the end. But 3 people, you see a thread. And it's very interesting. When people come back, they always say, well, this is what I've got to work on. Now, let's see about what are your strengths? What has God put in you? This is you. He accepts you. He loves you. He's uniquely wired you for you. Doesn't mean to say we fall on our face and say, God, change me. We still need to do that. So we hold this balance. But in the end, we live from that place of acceptance. The Son walking up the road and the Father running down the road, throwing all, honour and respect of how he looks out of the window to embrace his Son. And then what has God said to you prophetically? Collate those prophetic words. That's him speaking to you. Very powerful thing we've done in the School of Prophecy is to declare, God says, I'm a warrior. I'm this, I'm that. That's us not bigging ourselves up, but saying, I'm going to stand significantly under the acceptance of God, who's cheering me on. And again, it's that journey of seeing him as a father who loves us, not a father who hits us over the head and says, you're not doing enough, you know. It's a journey, and we can help each other on that journey. One of the other aspects to our scaffolding is establishing clear boundaries. Whoa, boundaries, yes. Learning to say no. And it's always difficult for some people because I think it's very selfish. But we have to put our oxygen mask on first, yeah? Before we put it on the person next door to us on the plane. So years ago, when we were on our plot in Joburg, the electric fence went off. So I went out to see what was going on. And I was in the corner of the property, and I realized I was under the thorn tree that drops all these really big thorns, and I was wearing really thin sandals. So every time I stepped, more thorns would come up in my feet, you know. So in the end, I had to kind of jump out of my flip-flops onto grass, walk back. And as I was walking back, I felt God say, you're not going to do that again, are you? I said, no, I always had a good solid pair of shoes by the door, you know, in case the fence went off. And he said, similarly, sometimes you've got to leave people under the tree to realize they won't do that again. So sometimes you rescue people too early. And that's the boundary. Sometimes I can't bear their pain. Let me take them out of it. They need to feel their pain so that they will learn. So the circle of concern and responsibility is we have huge circles of concern because we love people and we see the issues and we want to make it better. But what's our responsibility? What is Jesus saying to do? It may be to pray. It may be to get somebody else involved. It may be to sit and wait and see. So we do, as I've read before, I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He does only what he sees his Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son also does. So similarly, I think, you know, when we recognize in people things, sometimes ask the Lord, do I share that now? I had a lady who came to see me, and as she's sitting there, I wrote 5 things down. And then she came back the next time and said, God has shown me 5 things. How much better for that conviction to come to her than for me to say this, this, and this, or I'm going to rescue from this. So we work alongside, of course, the Holy Spirit, and how much better that people get conviction themselves. And that saves us so much stress if we're doing it only what God has asked us to do. The moment we step out of that little circle of responsibility, I honestly think we run out of grace, because God's got grace for us here. And that's when we go, the circle goes the wrong way, the cycle of grace goes the wrong way, and we run out of steam. We also need to recognize that we can go into a spirit of scarcity. So we give and give and give, and then, like Martha, go, well, no one's helping me, I'm just going to look after myself. So we measure how much we can give. Again, that's just a reaction to being exhausted. Hudson Taylor, the missionary, said, God's will, done God's way, will never lack God's supplies. So sometimes we're asked to give and it feels very exhausting. Has God asked you to do that? Then do it. He will supply. Push against that, I've had enough, I'm not doing anymore. Which is often, you know, we're honest, when we're very tired. So we've always got to be led by the Spirit in the way we give, say no, and push through. One of the big parts of our scaffolding is accountability. It's a word we use a lot, we talk about it a lot, and most definitely our healing is lived out in community. Remember those trees? Their roots go together, and some of that is where we get healed. We need, as we've said before, vulnerable and authentic friendships, safe places, open-hearted people. And we need to be ready to change, to be more like Jesus. And many, many of the leaders who have fallen in sin or fallen off the cliff because they're so exhausted would say some of that was because they weren't accountable. They said they were accountable, but they weren't deeply accountable. Some of that was because we can hide or justify sin. We can compartmentalize or minimize. I'm not going to tell them that because it's not as bad as that. So I'm not going to tell them that. We've got to be really, really careful that we're open. Maybe they sense that they as leaders can't share their weaknesses or needs. We've talked again about that when we're looking at good friendships and not being relationally isolated. And as we've mentioned in a previous session, sometimes we don't even know what to share because we don't know how we are, which is why we need some good questions to be asked. John Wesley had a holy club. He met with 22 guys and he had 22 questions. They met every week. These questions are very poignant, and here they are. Am I consciously or unconsciously creating the impression that I am better than I am? In other words, am I a hypocrite? Am I honest in all my acts and words, or do I exaggerate? Do I confidentially pass on to another what was told to me in confidence? And as my mother-in-law always used to say, is the absent person always safe with me? Is somebody who's not there, is their reputation and character going to be safe? Can I be trusted? Am I a slave to dress, friends, works, or habit? Am I self-conscious, self-pitying, or self-justifying? Did the Bible live in me today? Do I give it time to speak to me every day? Am I enjoying prayer? When did I last speak to someone about my faith? Do I pray about the money I spend? Do I get to bed on time and get up on time? And I added this one for millennials. Do I make my bed? Very important. Do I disobey God in anything? Do I insist on doing something about which my conscience is uneasy? Am I defeated in any part of my life? Am I jealous, impure, critical, irritable, touchy, or distrustful? How do I spend my spare time? Am I proud? Do I thank God that I'm not as other people, especially as the Pharisees who despised the publican? Is there anyone whom I fear, dislike, disown, criticize, hold a resentment toward, or disregard? If so, what am I doing about it? Do I grumble or complain constantly? Is Christ real to me? Amazing questions. What I like about these questions is they're very broad spectrum. And what I've suggested to people is that they look for five questions, five-ish questions, that would give somebody who's asking them an indicator of where your red flags are. So somebody said to me recently, he'd had a problem with lying. So he said, I'm going to always ask the person to ask me, have I been exaggerating? Am I honest in everything, in my acts and words? Exaggeration is still lying. It's just the thin end of the wedge, isn't it? But there may be other questions. How is your diary looking? Those kind of questions are they're not sin-based, they're health-based. But what they're doing in the person that your friend, person that you're walking alongside, you're saying, these are my red flags. I need you to ask me about them because I can just dumb my red flags down. I need you to ask me these questions. How is my bed? Am I going to bed at the same time and getting up at the same time? And a girl actually recently, she said, have I made my bed? It is important for some people. It's a routine there's a sense of discipline in their lives. It's really worth thinking about, and I don't know whether in this session you can think about it, but to think, go home and think, what 5 questions do I want somebody to regularly ask me that give me an indication of whether I'm healthy? Obviously, when you're struggling with something that you've turned away sin-wise, that question has to be in there too. But we're talking about keeping us healthy. And you've got to keep asking those questions. And then maybe if you've conquered something and you feel really good in one area, then you can chop and change those questions around. But they've got to be things that get to you in the deep down, that's going to bring us into health. I feel that's real accountability. People who look into you and say, have you had a day off recently? I have a friend that does that. What are you doing on your day off? Okay. Have you had a date night, as somebody said to us recently? Why not? I'm not staring at you, I'm sort of, as she did to me. So have a think about those. Then building resilience. So we've talked about saying no. We've talked about looking after yourself. But quite honestly, we also need to be resilient. And actually, this culture is not a resilient culture. This up-and-coming generation are not resilient. It's quite entitled. So I was given a tour around Kirstenbosch. They do these free tours, and this lady was showing us around. And everything in Kirstenbosch, the botanical gardens in Cape Town, are indigenous, apart from these oak trees that came from England. And they were planted to produce timber for the burgeoning colony and to produce wine for the wine vats, wood for the wine vats. But when they cut them down, they realized the timber was not strong enough to bear weight, and it was too porous to hold wine. Why, they thought to themselves? It's because they haven't wintered. Oak trees, these particular oak trees, needed the cold English winter to winter. And that's what hard times do for us. They build resilience. And that's where we want to be, don't we? We want to be people that bear weight, and we want to be people that hold the Holy Spirit well and don't drip out. So sometimes things are hard, and we've just got to encourage people and ourselves to push through. Doesn't mean to say it's going to always be like that. Doesn't mean to say it's going to be hard. But actually, there are times where we just have to be resilient and trust the Lord that He is going to do something deep within us. And not take things personally. This is a hard time. I'm not taking it personally. I'm just going to push through and trust God. And then self-discipline. And we talk, just the whole thing of scaffolding is there's a huge element of self-discipline in that. But self-discipline in the small opens up for the bigger, isn't it? So following through with things. If you say you're going to do something with somebody, do it. Follow through. The self-discipline. The small little self-disciplines. If you said to yourself, I will go to bed at 10 o'clock every night, and I'm going to keep to that. You keep to it. Structure and routine helps our mental state, and we need to be disciplined in that. I did a talk on depression, and one of my friends gave me a list of things that help her mentally. And so some of those are the things we've talked about. Eating well, exercise. But for her, a clean house, a clean and tidy house, helped her in her own mental state. But it's a discipline, isn't it, to keep things clean and tidy? And all those kind of things we need to sharpen up on. And God does. Most people don't know some of our self-disciplines, but God does. And as we are faithful in the little, He's going to open up the bigger. So we've looked at the pressures of ministry. We've looked at what looks like healthy. We've unpacked some of emotions. We could do hours on that. We've looked at different keys, strategies, scaffolding that's going to help us stay healthy. So this is your activation for you to identify red flags in each bucket. So when you're emotionally depleted, what red flag, what shows you that you are? And to be able to share that with each other, examples of those red flags. And then have a think and share what scaffolding do you need to add or to adjust to keep yourself healthy. Then ongoing health checks. How full are my buckets? By now, you are self-aware, you're monitoring your emotions, so you'll be able to know, and you're aware of your red flags. How full are my buckets? You know what? We've identified what healthy is. So you'll know when you're not being so healthy. Is there flow? River in, river out. Some of that will fill your bucket, because flowing out actually fills us, doesn't it, often? When we minister, it fills us. So our bucket will be filling as we're flowing out. Do you recognize red flags that indicate you're running close to empty? And that's something ongoingly you're going to be looking at. How is your scaffolding? Is it working? You can have a good routine, but is it working? What else do you need to add or adjust? If you're saying, you've had a Sabbath, but actually it hasn't really been a Sabbath. You've ticked the box of Sabbath, but has it been working for you? What do you need to adjust? Do you have somebody or people with whom you can totally be yourself, who will ask you those hard questions, those 5 questions we've talked about, the red flag questions? If you haven't, ask the Lord to give them to you and to be intentional to lean in and say, I need a friend. God wants that. He wants all of us to have people to walk alongside us. How is my self-talk? Monitor yourself. What are you saying to yourself? What are you thinking when you wake up? Is it true? Is it not? Sometimes we just need to tell the enemy to get off our shoulder. He's the accuser of the brethren. I had a stage in the last few weeks where I'd wake up at night and I'd have these sort of thoughts from the enemy of memories where I hadn't done things right. And it was just accusations. I just thought, I'm not having this. That's the enemy. So we have to watch these things. Am I growing in emotional self-awareness? I challenge you to keep an emotional journal. There is an app, I think it's How Do I Feel? But there's also writing them down. So like I said, you may have a day where there's been something that's come up, you can't process it there. Write it down and process it when you get home. What was that emotion? Where did it come from? What am I thinking underneath? What's the lie underneath that emotion? And what am I going to do with it? And look also when you react. Remember, a reaction is something deeper. It's always disproportionate to the situation. And a reaction always has another emotion underneath. And remember, we're all in this together. When I ask you how you are, I want to know how you are. Let's lean into each other's lives. We're building together the bride of Christ.